There's a kind of exhaustion that sleep can't fix. It comes from pretending you have all the answers when your soul is still asking the questions. You wake up some mornings, and the first thing you feel isn't peace, it's pressure. The pressure to know, to be certain, to have it figured out. What you're doing with your life, where you're going, who you're becoming. As if uncertainty were a disease and clarity the only cure. We've been taught that not knowing is a weakness, a gap in our armor, a crack in our confidence. So we fill the silence with strategies. We stack our days with plans. We build identities out of answers we're not even sure we believe in. And somewhere beneath it all, there's a quiet voice that whispers, "What if I'm wrong? What if I don't actually know?" But we silence that voice, because not knowing feels like falling. And we've been trained to grip the edges of certainty like our lives depend on it. Think about the last time someone asked you a simple question. What do you really want? And you felt that flicker of panic, that moment where your mind scrambled to assemble an answer that sounded convincing. Not true, just convincing. Because the truth is, you don't know, and that terrifies you. We live in a world that worships knowing. Experts, gurus, 5-year plans. People who speak with unshakable confidence, as if life were an equation they've already solved. And when you don't have that certainty, you feel left behind. Like everyone else received a map, and you're just wandering in the dark, hoping you're headed somewhere that matters. But here's what no one tells you. The people who seem most certain are often the most afraid. Because certainty isn't wisdom, it's a shield. A way to protect yourself from the vulnerability of not having all the answers. It's armor disguised as enlightenment. The mind loves certainty. It craves solid ground. It wants to categorize, label, predict, and control. Because the mind believes that if it can name something, it can master it. If it can define you, it can keep you safe. So it builds walls out of beliefs, towers out of opinions, fortresses out of knowing, and inside those walls you feel secure, until you realize you've also become trapped. Because the opposite of knowing isn't ignorance, it's openness. And openness requires a kind of courage. We rarely talk about the courage to sit with the unanswered, to hold space for the mystery, to let yourself be uncertain without collapsing into fear. Most people spend their entire lives running from that space. They fill it with noise, with distractions, with borrowed philosophies and second-hand certainties. They become someone else's answer to a question they never asked themselves. And then one day, the structure cracks. The answers stop working. The identity you built so carefully begins to feel like a costume that no longer fits. And you're left standing there, stripped of certainty, wondering, who am I when I'm not pretending to know? That question is where freedom begins. Not in the knowing, not in the arrival, but in the release, in the soft exhale of finally admitting, I don't know. And that's okay, because not knowing isn't failure. It's the doorway, the threshold, the place where something real can finally emerge. When you stop clinging to certainty, something shifts. The pressure lifts. The performance ends. You stop trying to convince the world and yourself that you have it all together. And in that space, a deeper intelligence begins to move. Not the intelligence of the mind, which plans and analyzes and measures, but the intelligence of the heart, the intuition, the part of you that doesn't need to know in order to trust, that doesn't need a map in order to move. that can walk into the unknown and feel at home there. This is what the mystics have always known. The Sufis call it fana, the annihilation of the false self. The Zen masters call it beginner's mind. The poets call it surrender. But they're all pointing to the same truth, that the person you think you are is built on knowing, and the person you truly are lives beyond it. You are not your certainty. You are not your conclusions. You are not the story you've been telling yourself about who you should be or where you should be headed. You are the awareness that watches all of it, the stillness beneath the noise, the space in which knowing and not knowing both arise and pass away. And when you touch that space, even for a moment, you realize something astonishing you've never actually needed to know. You've only needed to be awake, to be present, to trust the unfolding, because life isn't a problem waiting for your solution. It's a mystery inviting your participation. And the moment you stop trying to solve it, the moment you stop demanding that it makes sense on your terms, it begins to reveal itself in ways you never imagined. Not through answers, but through presence, through openness, through the quiet freedom of letting go. We spend our whole lives trying to hold water in our hands, then wonder why we're always thirsty. There's a certain kind of violence in the way we approach life. Not the obvious kind, the kind that hides behind good intentions. The violence of trying to force everything to fit, to make sense, to align with our expectations. We clutch at outcomes. We script conversations in our heads before they happen. We rehearse futures that haven't arrived. And when reality doesn't match our blueprint, we feel betrayed, as if life owed us an explanation. This need to know, to control, to determine, it's not really about understanding. It's about fear. Fear of being vulnerable. Fear of being caught unprepared. Fear that if we don't have the answers, we'll be exposed as frauds in our own existence. So we build elaborate systems of knowing. We create routines that feel like certainty. We hold on to beliefs like life rafts. We identify with our knowledge because it gives us something to stand on in a world that's constantly shifting beneath our feet. But here's the paradox. The more we try to solidify our knowing, the more brittle we become. The more we demand that life conform to our understanding, the more we suffer when it doesn't. The more we invest in being right, the more terrified we become of being wrong. And slowly, without realizing it, we stop living and start defending. Defending our positions, our identities, our carefully constructed sense of who we are and how things should be. This is the trap of the intellectual mind. It thinks it can think its way to truth. It believes that if it just gathers enough information, analyzes enough data, considers enough perspectives, it will finally arrive at certainty, at peace. But peace doesn't live in the mind. It never has. Peace lives in the space where the mind falls silent, where knowing gives way to simple presence, where you stop trying to figure everything out and start feeling your way through. Think about the times in your life when you felt most alive, most connected, most real. Were you in your head analyzing and planning? Or were you fully present, absorbed in a moment, too immediate for thought? Maybe it was watching a sunset, holding someone you love, creating something with your hands, standing at the edge of an ocean. Those moments when time seemed to dissolve and you weren't thinking about who you are. Or what comes next, you were just there. That's the intelligence of not knowing. It doesn't think, it perceives. It doesn't plan, it responds. It doesn't cling, it flows. And the beautiful thing about this intelligence is that it's always been with you. You didn't have to learn it or earn it. It's the original wisdom you were born with before language taught you to label everything, before culture taught you to seek certainty, before fear taught you to protect yourself with knowing. Children live in this space naturally. They don't need to know why the sky is blue to marvel at it. They don't need to understand music theory to dance. They don't need to have life figured out to feel joy. They simply meet each moment with wonder, with curiosity, with an openness that doesn't demand explanation. And then we grow up, and we're taught that wonder isn't enough. That curiosity is childish. That openness is naive. We're taught to be serious, to have opinions, to take positions, to know things. So we trade wonder for certainty, curiosity for conclusion, openness for judgment, and we call this maturity. But what if maturity isn't about accumulating answers? What if it's about developing the capacity to sit with questions, to hold paradox without needing to resolve it, to embrace the mystery without trying to solve it? What if wisdom isn't what you know, but how gracefully you can dance with not knowing? The ancient teachers understood this. They didn't write textbooks, they told stories. They didn't give answers, they posed riddles. They didn't hand down certainties, they pointed at the moon and told you not to confuse their finger for the destination, because they knew that truth can't be captured in concepts. It can only be experienced, lived, embodied. When Buddha was asked about the nature of reality, he remained silent. Not because he didn't know, but because words would only create another prison of understanding, another set of beliefs to cling to, another substitute for direct experience. When asked about God, the Sufis spoke in poetry and paradox, not because they were being cryptic, but because the divine can't be contained in definitions. The moment you say, God is this, you've created a boundary, and that which is infinite cannot be bounded. This is why the mystics throughout history have pointed to unknowing as the highest form of knowing, to emptiness as the most complete fullness, to silence as the deepest teaching. They're not being contradictory. They're trying to free you from the prison of your own mind, from the exhausting need to have everything figured out. Because when you release that need, when you truly let go of the demand for certainty, something miraculous happens. You don't fall apart. You don't dissolve into chaos. You become more solid, more grounded, more real. Because you're no longer standing on the shifting sand of mental constructs. You're resting in something deeper. Something that doesn't need your defense or your explanation. Something that simply is. And from that place, you can move through life with a different kind of confidence. Not the confidence of someone who knows all the answers, but the confidence of someone who trusts the questions, who trusts the process, who trusts themselves enough to not need a map for every step. This is the freedom that lives on the other side of knowing. The freedom to be fully here, fully present, fully alive, without the weight of having to understand it all. What if the breakthrough you're seeking isn't found in finally knowing, but in finally letting yourself not know? There comes a moment in every seeker's journey when the seeking itself becomes the obstacle. When the very thing you thought would save you becomes the thing you need to release. You've been looking for answers, for clarity, for the insight that will finally make everything make sense. And in that searching, you've created a subtle form of suffering, the suffering of incompleteness. The belief that you're somehow broken and knowledge will fix you, that you're somehow lost and understanding will guide you home. But you were never broken. You were never lost. You were just convinced that being human means having it all figured out. That spiritual awakening is about achieving some permanent state of knowing. That enlightenment is a destination where all questions cease and all doubts dissolve. And so you've been striving, seeking, accumulating wisdom like currency, reading books, attending workshops, following teachers, trying to become someone who knows. But here's what they don't tell you at the beginning of the path. The person who begins the journey is not the person who completes it. Because completion doesn't come through addition, it comes through subtraction. Not gathering more knowledge, but releasing your attachment to it. Not becoming more certain, but becoming more comfortable with uncertainty. Not finding all the answers, but falling in love with the questions. This is the great reversal. The paradox at the heart of all genuine transformation. The ego seeks knowing because knowing gives it something to hold on to, something to identify with, something to defend. But the soul, your true nature, doesn't need to know. It already is. It's not trying to become anything or arrive anywhere. It's already whole, already complete, already home. And the moment you recognize this, truly recognize it, not just intellectually, but in the marrow of your being, everything changes. The pressure lifts, the race stops, the performance ends. You realize you've been carrying a burden that was never yours to carry. Answering questions that were never really questions. Solving problems that were never really problems. You were simply taught to see life as a puzzle requiring your solution. But life isn't a puzzle, it's a dance. And you can't dance while you're busy trying to map out every step. The freedom of not knowing is the freedom to be fully present, to meet life as it unfolds, rather than as you think it should unfold. To respond to this moment, this singular, unprecedented, never to be repeated moment rather than reacting from the past or projecting into the future. When you don't know, you're forced to pay attention, to listen deeply, to feel your way forward rather than thinking your way through. And in that state of alert openness, you discover capacities you didn't know you had. You discover that intuition is more reliable than logic when it comes to navigating complexity. That your body knows things your mind hasn't yet conceptualized. That silence speaks louder than the constant chatter of internal dialogue. You discover that you can trust yourself without needing to understand yourself. That you can move forward without needing to see the entire path. That you can make choices without guarantees and still find your way. This is what faith actually means, not belief in doctrines or ideologies, but trust in the intelligence of life itself. Trust that you are part of something larger, something wiser, something that knows how to unfold even when you don't. The trees don't know they're going to blossom in spring, but they do. The ocean doesn't know where each wave will land, but it flows. The stars don't know why they shine, but they illuminate the darkness. And you don't need to know why you're here or where you're going in order to live fully. in order to love deeply, in order to contribute meaningfully. You just need to show up, to be present, to let life move through you without obstruction. This is what the Taoists mean by wu-wei, effortless action. Not passivity, but alignment. Not forcing, but allowing. Not controlling, but cooperating with the natural intelligence that animates all things. When you stop trying to know everything, you start experiencing everything. The world becomes vivid again. Colors are brighter, sounds are clearer, moments are more textured and rich. Because you're not filtering reality through your concepts anymore. You're meeting it directly. And in that direct encounter, something awakens. Not new knowledge, but ancient recognition. The remembering of what you've always known, but forgot that you are not separate from life. You are life. Consciousness experiencing itself. Mystery exploring mystery. The questions you've been asking, who am I? Why am I here? What should I do? They don't disappear. But they transform. They stop being problems requiring solutions and become cones inviting contemplation. Doorways rather than barriers. You begin to see that the question, who am I, cannot be answered with words because you are not a concept. You are a presence, an awareness, a witnessing that exists before and beyond all identities. The question, why am I here, dissolves because you realize there doesn't need to be a reason. Your existence is its own justification. You are here because you are here, and that is enough. The question, what should I do, becomes less urgent because you understand that doing flows naturally from being. When you're aligned with your deepest nature, action becomes spontaneous, appropriate, and effortless. This is the wisdom of not knowing it returns you to your essential nature, to the simplicity beneath the complexity, to the stillness beneath the noise, to the freedom beneath the fear. And from that place, you don't need to figure out your life. You simply live it. You don't need to find your purpose. You embody it. You don't need to become enlightened. You recognize that consciousness itself, the awareness reading these words right now, is already the light. You've been looking for something you already are. And the moment you stop looking is the moment you find it. The question isn't whether you can live without knowing. You already are. The question is, can you finally stop pretending otherwise? So what does this mean for your actual life? For the decisions you need to make, the uncertainty you're facing, the questions keeping you awake at night. It means you stop waiting for certainty before you move. Because certainty is not a prerequisite for action, presence is. You don't need to know the outcome to take the next step. You don't need to see the entire staircase to climb the first stair. You don't need to have your whole life mapped out to live this day fully. What you need is the courage to be here now, to feel what you're feeling without rushing to fix it or figure it out, to sit with the discomfort of not knowing without numbing yourself with distraction or false certainty. This is the practice. Notice when you're reaching for certainty out of fear, when you're demanding answers because you can't tolerate the openness, when you're constructing elaborate theories about your life instead of simply living it. And in those moments, pause, breathe, feel your feet on the ground, feel the aliveness in your body. Come back to what's actually here, not what you think should be here, not what you hope will be here, but what is here. This moment, this breath, This simple, undeniable fact of your existence. From that place of presence, ask yourself, what does this situation need? Not what does my fear demand, not what does my ego want to protect, but what does life itself want to move through me right now? And then listen. Not to your habitual thoughts or conditioned responses, but to the deeper knowing that emerges from stillness. The knowing that doesn't come from your head, but from your whole being. This is how you navigate life without the false security of rigid knowing. You feel your way forward. You let each situation teach you. You remain fluid, responsive, alive to possibility. When you don't know, you're forced to pay exquisite attention. To notice subtleties you'd otherwise miss. To hear what's being said beneath the words. To sense what's emerging before it becomes obvious. This is actually a more intelligent way of moving through the world than clinging to fixed knowledge. Because the world is not fixed. It's fluid, it's dynamic, it's constantly revealing new dimensions, new possibilities, new ways of being. And if you're locked into what you know, you'll miss what's trying to emerge. You'll keep relating to new situations with old patterns. You'll keep trying to force today to look like yesterday. But when you embrace not knowing, you become available to what's actually happening. You can meet this moment on its own terms rather than yours. You can respond creatively rather than reactively. This doesn't mean you abandon all structure or wisdom. You don't throw away everything you've learned, but you hold it lightly. You let your knowledge inform you without imprisoning you. Think of it like music. A jazz musician learns scales, learns theory, learns technique. But when they perform, they don't play from what they know, they play from what they feel. They let the moment guide them. They respond to the other musicians, to the energy in the room, to something spontaneous and alive. That's the art of living from not knowing. You have skills, you have experience, you have wisdom. But you don't let it calcify into rigid knowing. You keep it fluid. You keep it alive. You let it dance with the unknown. And here's what you'll discover. The unknown is not your enemy. It's your creative partner. It's where all possibility lies. It's where innovation happens, where breakthroughs emerge, where life renews itself. Every great discovery in human history came from someone willing to question what was known. Every genuine insight came from someone willing to sit in the discomfort of not knowing long enough for something new to emerge. The same is true for your life. The moments of genuine transformation don't come when you finally figure everything out. They come when you finally stop trying. When you release your grip on certainty and let yourself fall into the mystery. And what you discover in that falling is that you don't crash. You fly. Because you were never meant to have life figured out. You were meant to explore it, to marvel at it, to be astonished by it, to let it unfold in ways you could never predict or control. This is what it means to be truly alive, to live in the question rather than the answer, to embrace the journey rather than obsess about the destination, to find joy not in achieving certainty but in cultivating wonder. So today, right now, what if you gave yourself permission to not know? To release the pressure of having to understand everything. To let yourself be a beginner again, curious and open and undefended. What if you approached your relationships without needing to have them figured out? What if you moved through your work without needing to control every outcome? What if you faced your challenges without needing to know in advance how they'll resolve? What if you trusted that you are part of an intelligence far greater than your individual mind? That life knows what it's doing even when you don't. That there is a current beneath the chaos, a pattern within the randomness, a meaning that doesn't require your understanding to be real. This is not passive resignation. This is radical trust. It's the foundation of courage. Because it takes far more bravery to step into the unknown than to hide behind what you think you know. And when you take that step, when you finally release your death grip on certainty, something miraculous happens. You become lighter, more fluid, more creative, more present, more alive. You stop performing and start being. You stop defending and start discovering. You stop seeking and start seeing. You realize that the freedom you've been searching for was never in the knowing. It was always in the letting go. The truth is, you've never really known anything. Not the way you think you have. You've only ever had thoughts about knowing, beliefs about certainty, stories about understanding. But underneath all of that, before every thought, beneath every belief, deeper than every story, there is something that simply is. Something that doesn't need to know because it already exists. Something that doesn't need to understand because it is understanding itself. That something is you, the real you, the one who's been here all along, watching the performance, waiting for you to come home. And you can come home right now. Not by finding the answer, but by releasing the question. Not by achieving enlightenment, but by recognizing you were never separate from it. You are the awareness in which all knowing and not knowing arises. You are the space in which certainty and uncertainty both appear and disappear. You are the freedom you've been seeking. And it's been here all along, waiting patiently in the one place you forgot to look, the beautiful, terrifying, a liberating mystery of not knowing. Welcome home.